Let's talk about your retirement announcement this summer, which, by the way, I was on vacation. I appreciate you interrupting that to make that decision. Have you had any regrets since that decision?
No.
No?
None at all. None at all. It's something that I had given a lot of thought to over the last few months. And look, it's been a real honor and a privilege to serve the people in Arkansas's 4th Congressional District for the last 11 plus years. And I've got 15 months left in this term. I hope my presence in 15 towns and doing 10 town hall meetings this week demonstrates that I'm going to continue to work just as hard to the end as I've tried faithfully to do from the beginning. But you know, we don't have term limits at the national level. And so I feel like they have to be self-imposed. And I never believe my time in Congress should be a permanent career. I never believe this seat belonged to me. It belongs to the people of Arkansas's 4th Congressional District. And like a lot of the American people, I too am fed up with Congress, largely because of what I just described to you about how partisan in nature everything has become. You know, I was part of a group last week that called for a timeout on the 2012 elections and said, let's put country before party for once. You know, you look at when you've got 335 of the 435 members of Congress that can only be beat in their party's primary, they end up acting more like a European Parliament than they do a representational form of government. So there's about 100 of us left in the middle trying to participate in a representational form of government. The rest of them, whether it be Democrat or Republican, are simply doing whatever their national party leaders tell them to do, anywhere from 95 to 99% of the time. That's not what our founding fathers had envisioned. Who made a huge mistake.
Let's take a message that we're getting here from one of our viewers right now. This is from...
You're just really high-tech,
I
aren't
know,
you?
I really am. This is from Jason. Can you ask the congressman to clarify what he has said about Governor Perdue's suspension of elections? Have you commented on that?
No.
Are you familiar with the comments
not really.
there where Governor Perdue, I think in North Carolina, said that he thinks that Congress ought to take Congress might ought to take a vacation from an election cycle just so that people aren't worried about re-election. You kind of commented to that point earlier of everybody's worried about re-election.
I didn't know Governor Perdue had said that, but you know, it's just in my 11 years there, it is continually gotten much more partisan. You know, when I first ran for Congress, it took about $1.5 million to run. Now it takes $3 million. You know, with the overwhelming majority of that going to TV. You know, my district's a very difficult district to run in, and you know, we're having a difficult time. I think both parties are having a difficult time finding credible candidates to run, and I think the reason for that is, one, you know, you run for Congress in Little Rock, you buy Little Rock TV, you're done. In my district, you buy Little Rock TV, but then you got to buy Monroe, Louisiana TV, Shreveport, Louisiana TV, Fort Smith, Fayetteville TV. Jonesboro is the only media market in Arkansas that you do not buy. And so, one, you got to be willing to raise $3 million, and because it's a swing district, you got to do it every 2 years. You know, the Senate's 6 years, the President's 4 years, the U.S. House is 2 years. Then you've got to be willing to spend at least half of each week away from your family. And then if you're successful in doing all of that, you enter a profession where 12% of the American people like you.
If you're lucky.
Yeah, and so and I've watched this happen over the last few years. You're seeing more and more good folks not subject themselves and their families to that anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think the Supreme Court also did a terrible injustice in the ruling that basically said, you know, someone can contribute $2,500 to my campaign, but someone else can create a so-called super PAC like Karl Rove's done, and that same person that's limited to $2,500 to my campaign, and I think $2,500 is a fair amount. Here's the unfair part: they can write Karl Rove a check for $2.5 million. Mm-hmm. How do you compete with that? You know, we'd already seen Crossroads come in running ads against me. 6 months after I got reelected? You know, 6 or 8 months after I was reelected, they were on the airways running attack ads against me, something that, you know, they probably were going to do for 17 months, spend an estimated $5 million. You know, when I first got in this business, first ran for the House, you know, you'd raise $1 million, $1.5 million, your opponent raised $1 million, $1.5 million, you go after it, you know. But now what the candidates actually spend themselves is a fraction of the money that's spent trying to influence the voters by all these outside groups. And I just think the Supreme Court did a terrible injustice in their ruling that allows, limits what people can contribute to a candidate, which I agree with, but not putting the same limits on how much can be contributed to these super PACs, allowing just millions of dollars in checks to be written by almost anonymous individuals. So it's causing a lot of people not to want to run. But I guess to get back to more specific to your question, I think that's when I first got to Congress, pretty much the odd years, the non-election years, it wasn't so much political nonsense. It was people really trying to work and get the job done. And it was bad enough that we were working 1 out of 2 years. And on even years, election years, it was pretty much everything was political. Well, now it's political year-round. I mean, we'll cast lots of votes each week in the House. We may have 1 or 2 substantive votes each week in the House. The rest of the votes we cast all week are what I call gotcha votes. And both parties do it in terms of trying to, get a vote to get you on record on a certain position that oftentimes has nothing to do with the bill, and they know it isn't going anywhere. It's simply to cause you to have to cast a vote that they can then take and twist and turn it into a 30-second TV ad and attack you on. And I think the American people are fed up with that. I mean, we've been elected to do a job, not to play politics.
Well, this seems like what you're talking about, though. It seems like the toothpaste is out of the tube, though. You can't put it back in. So is that just people running for Congress have to know that that's the way that the game's going to get played in Washington? Or are you advocating some sort of change in the length of terms or the way that the cycles run?
No, I never had a problem with a 2-year term. That's what's unique about the House. It's the people's House. I mean, in the Senate, it's a 6-year term. And if something happens to a senator, they die, retire, or whatever, a successor can be appointed. Technically, someone can be appointed president, as we saw Nixon do with Ford, kind of indirectly able to appoint someone, the vice president, who then became president. And the reason the House is called the People's House is there's a vacancy whenever someone leaves for whatever reason until the people speak, until an election can be held. And I think the fact that, I run for re-election, I win, raise my right hand, take the oath of office, boom, I'm 15 months from the filing deadline to run again. I think that's healthy, though. I think it keeps House members more in touch with their constituents. There's too much money in the process. It costs too much to run. There's too much outside influence by these groups like Crossroads Group.
And there's Democratic ones.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I just hadn't seen them run ads in Arkansas for a while, and I can't remember their name. But absolutely. As I made it very clear early, both sides are guilty of this. And that's why I was part of a national press conference as co-chair of the Blue Dogs a few weeks ago to say, let's call a timeout on the 2012 elections and put country before party. If we could do that, and again, all this goes back to gerrymandering. Over the years, there's 100 of us that can get beat in November, 335 if they ever get beat, they're going to get beat in their party's primary. John Boehner can never lose a November general election. If he gets beat, it's going to be in his primary. So Republicans typically run to their far right, whether they believe that way or not. Democrats typically run to their far left, whether they believe that or not, because all they have to fear, if they're from those safe Democratic and Republican districts, is a primary. And there's 100 of us left in the middle trying to participate in a representational form of government. But I mean, for example, Boehner has an opponent this time who's running against him saying that Boehner's too liberal. Pelosi always has an opponent in the primary running against her saying she's too conservative. And I think that really brings it all home. But I think if we could just get back to, here's what the American people are going to demand. And I think if things don't change, because I've never seen the discourse this great, I've never seen the anger and frustration against Washington this great. And I'll make this prediction. If the Democrats and Republicans in the House can't find ways to work together and start focusing on running this country and putting people back to work and paying down this debt and this deficit, I think you may very well see not the Democrats winning or the Republicans winning, but all incumbents getting beat. Not all of them, but a lot of incumbents. A lot of people, typically elections are decided it's a victory for Democrats or it's a victory for Republicans, depending on how things fall in the elections. With the mood out there right now and the lack of anything getting done, in Washington, I very well think that you could see a lot of incumbents, Democrat and Republican, defeated in November 2012 if they don't wake up, stop the partisan bickering, and recognize we're all Americans first, and start finding ways to work together to get something done for the American people. That's why we were sent there. We weren't sent there to play games.